I'm Despina Katsakakis. I'm an architect by training. I have worked in workplace for over 30 years, and I'm currently an independent consultant working within the Barclays corporate real estate team. I think workplace tends to be much more about process than a solution, and that is probably the main difference between workplace focus to architectural focus. And traditionally, architects have always looked to have a vision that is effectively a predefined solution, whereas workplace comes more from embracing the client and creating a much more iterative design process. So I think workplace clients tend to often view architects as being slightly rigid in coming to the table with already a design solution in mind.
Tell me more about the point you just made about process.
Well, one of the big challenges within workplace is defining who the client is, because the client in the traditional architectural relationship is the person that pays you. However, when you're designing a workplace, you have multiple clients, many of whom have a variety of objectives that are often conflicting priorities. So the CEO will have a long-term vision, a strategic focus, and wants to drive innovation. The corporate real estate team will want to drive down costs and deliver a very efficient solution, and the HR directors will want to create something very innovative to attract talent. So the architect's role in that is to begin to articulate the priorities and define a design process that is embracing of all those conflicting elements in order to satisfy all aspects of the client. I think the whole approach of design is incredibly important when we talk about workplace, because workplace today is incredibly complex. It is not about going into an office building and sitting down at a desk and doing a task. Work happens anywhere and everywhere. So the role of the architect is being able to shift the solution from being a project to a place is significant. And I think most architects have that breadth of being able to think about buildings from the inside out and from the outside in. And I think that's very, very important, because it's fundamental to create places that can stimulate communities, sense of belonging, and bring quite rich experiences to clients. So moving from project to an experience, I think, is probably the first place of adding value. The second area of adding value is around defining what we mean by value. And I think that's a very open-ended question. Historically, many large corporates like to undertake post-occupancy evaluation. And that is an extremely robust way in being able to measure what is the value of the final solution to the end user. I think as we begin to evolve the role of workplace within architecture, that can be a really significant tool in helping us create evidence-based design. Because if we can measure the outcomes of the intervention the architect has made into actual value for the occupier, then we can really be able to demonstrate the value of the design up front. Well, currently the responsibility falls with probably the client, because it is the client who is looking to measure the impact that the design has had to their business. I think, however, it's a very big missed opportunity for architects, because if you can begin to create defendable value of your design, you can actually bring that information up front to create a much richer iterative design process. Historically, architects tend to finish their role when the building is done. And often, something that I find quite appalling is that architects photograph buildings and interiors without people in them, because they often feel that people interfere with their final design. So a lot of what I'm saying is about the architect embracing the end user and using the evolving design to really demonstrate their value. I think the role of the architect at the moment is very difficult because there is so much segmentation in the procurement process. And that segmentation gets in the way of creating really effective design solutions. So the architect, I think, is the one role that can help bring together the disparate elements of the final solution. And it's a complicated role for the architect. I think in some ways you could say the architect could be a choreographer who's also the lead dancer, someone that understands the process but actually needs to embrace other talent to co-create a final solution. And the end user, the occupier, becomes one of those co-creators. And the more the architect can bring those stakeholders, those contributors together to create a collective vision, the more robust and resilient that design will be to change over time. I think this goes back to the architectural education and what are the skills and how are architects taught to manage the design process and the client. And certainly my experience, and obviously I was at architecture school a long time ago, was that you go through a process where you focus very much on controlling your concept and controlling the solution. And you create this perfect vision that you're then trying to deliver. And I think that's a real problem in terms of the skill set that we need today. We need to, within architecture, embrace what's happening in creative collaboration around every other discipline. So if you think about technology, it's all about disruptive collaboration is what creates better solutions and better outcomes. And I think those are the skills that architects require today. It's to be open, to relinquish control, to be able to embrace input from quite unexpected sources, and again be able to co-create and come up with a very different solution than they might have thought of in the first instance, but still be able to drive that overall vision and help, as I said before, choreograph it effectively.
Okay.
Well, architectural education teaches architects to control the outcome. And I think what's changed in today's world is that we need to be open to disruptive collaboration, to allow the architect to, whilst they might have an overall vision, be able to be open to relinquish control, to allow other contributors to come into that process, and to create a process that actually puts the end user at the center of what will ultimately be an experience, not just a building. Yes, I think so. If we think about the procurement process today, it tends to create separation, and it forces often architects to deal with isolated elements of the building, which at the end of the day does not produce a very effective outcome. So I think one of the roles of the architect and the RIBA would be to challenge that and to look at the value of integrating both inside-out thinking and outside-in thinking, and looking at how we can create a procurement process that actually takes collective responsibility across those elements of the experience. Because we're not creating isolated buildings, we are creating seamless experience from the desk to the city. And that is how work happens, and that's how design should happen. I think the three parts to the one message that I would give to the profession. The first and foremost would be listen more. I think being open to listening and understanding the priorities of the client will always improve the design outcome. The second one would be open to collaborate. And collaboration should always be about coming up with new ideas, new solutions. And the third one, which I think underpins both the previous two, is being open to embrace change. Everything in the world of work is changing. So if we are designing workplaces, we must think of it as a continuously changing set of requirements. The organization that the architect will be designing for today will be very different by the time they move into the building. So embracing change in everything and challenging every design idea through multiple facets will give better outcomes.